I do believe in this stuff. These aren't just things that I say. Everybody who's ever worked with me, I always talk about the most valuable slide I've ever created is just a slide with a table with 2 columns in it. My general ethos, whether it's been as a consultant, as a person working at a company, as a manager, a leader of people, is just to make other people heroes.
Hello and welcome back for season 3 of the Digital Community Leaders podcast here. We are so glad you've joined us. So, welcome to the Digital Community Leaders podcast, a conversation with community experts diving into their insights and leaving you with actionable ideas. Today we're joined by Brian Oblinger, a well-known community consultant helping brands increase satisfaction, lower costs, and generate more revenue through the power of community. Brian has worked with the likes of eBay, Oracle, PlayStation, Sephora, just to name a few. Working with these brands, he focuses on creating comprehensive community strategies, executing them effectively, and ensuring their long-term success. Brian's also known for his contributions to the field through education and thought leadership. He co-hosts In Before the Lock podcast, where he shares his insights on community management, customer experience, and leadership. He's spoken at numerous industry events, including CMX, and he most recently spoke at Led By Community Summit in London, all about content strategies, which is where I met him. Quickly, before we jump into the podcast, a quick word from our sponsors. We are Steadfast Collective. We exist to craft digital applications that bring people together. A team of smart creatives, we are excited by technology, and we always aim to leave the internet in a better place than we found it. Working with many of the UK's leading communities, we use technology as an accelerator to help them grow and engage their members. Our applications resource membership organisations, grow businesses, and create value. We know what it takes to ship, market, and scale applications, and we apply this wealth of background knowledge to everything we do. We're not just another agency. We are community builders. Hey, Brian, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Good. It's so good to have you here. Thank you for joining us. How has your day been going so far? It's the morning for you. So had your morning coffee?
Yes. I've had my coffee. I'm ready to go.
Well, it's so good to get a chance to chat. I saw you speak recently in London, where you talked all about how content is queen and about how to build out content strategies, which are not just useful, but also really effective in terms of how we can deliver the same piece of content in multiple ways. So it will be seen by somebody, whether they want to see it in video or LinkedIn post or email, we're going to get it to their eyes. I'm really intrigued to know, like, what inspired that talk? Was it a recent consulting conversation you'd had, or something you've seen kind of floating around recently?
Yeah, it's funny. Definitely, something that I always talk about with clients and people in general. It was something that came up recently with a client, and I kind of thought, well, I should just repurpose this into a talk. I also just think it's one of the things that a lot of communities are missing. And so sometimes with the conference talks, we do these big, heady, strategic, things. And I kind of thought, well, I'm just going to do something really tactical and really applicable to as many people as possible. So that was sort of the plan, as it were.
I liked it, and I think what I like about the strategy is we implement something similar here at Steadfast, in that we try to produce something that's really high quality and long form, and then that can be repurposed in so many different ways. And for me, as the business leader, it's just such an effective use of my time, where I get to spend 30 minutes having a conversation with somebody or doing some thought leadership, putting together some sort of longer form content. And then ultimately the team can then use those insights to then make short form content, make infographics, whatever kind of the different formats are. And I think if you are a community manager or any kind of marketing manager, and you're looking to make these really high quality pieces of content, but your C-suite's time is really limited, it's such an effective way to get so much content out of a limited amount of time with a C-suite member.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, if you build anything and you only use it once, you're probably wasting a lot of opportunity to, repackage it, rebrand it, reuse it, use it in 10 different contexts. I'm a big fan of build once and then leverage it everywhere, if you possibly can anyway.
Nice. So we've dived straight in, but what would be good is to get a bit of a brief overview of maybe how you first got into community and then kind of building up to your kind of consulting role now. So do you want to give us a bit of an overview?
Yeah, it's been a long road. I got into community back in the 90s. Just fell into it, I guess, like most people, just it kind of happened to me, sort of a thing. And I just loved going to communities and chatting with people around the world. That was like a really mind-blowing thing to me when, back then, of talking to people in Japan, and I just couldn't believe it, that was like a thing we could do. And it just really fascinated me. So I just kept doing it and kept doing it and kept doing it until eventually they were like, well, you're here all the time. You may as well help us out, with moderation and community management and stuff. And as sort of a dumb kid, I was like, yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to work for free. That sounds awesome, So did that for a while, and then it kind of became a real job where like real money. I get paid real money to be on communities. This is wild. So that's how it started, and then built up, I guess, my career out of that, working for platform vendors and then going to a couple of companies and trying to take all the things I ever said and make them real to, prove that it could be done or could be done a certain way, I guess. And then that led me, kind of back to the consulting side again of how can I teach as many people as possible how to do this and help them get value. And I think that brings us up to current. That's sort of the super short version of it all.
So does an average week, do your weeks look similar? Obviously, you have a podcast, you produce a fair amount of content, you have various different clients. Is your weekly cycle fairly similar, or does each week look fairly different?
Yeah, I would say there's the bones are the same. There's sort of the same recurring meetings with certain clients. There's a bit of a schedule as far as, the producing the podcast, producing some of the academy content, those things. So I'd say that's all pretty static. But then there's just the every week, especially with clients, there's always something different. There's a new question to answer. There's a new problem to solve. There's 4 alarm fires, whatever it is. So, which I actually like. I prefer it keeps it interesting and unique, and I'm still learning, something new every week by virtue of kind of everything being in flux and new things popping up. So, it keeps me on my toes, for sure.
So you've been in the community space for quite a while, just generally online for quite a while. What keeps you keep falling in love with the idea of helping communities grow and thrive? Are you finding kind of the niche you go, the more you love the technical detail stuff, or do you actually have folk you work with now who kind of do more of the hands-on stuff? Like, how are you still in love with what you're doing?
Yeah, it's interesting because to some degree, there's a lot of things that have stayed the same, the whole time, and are pretty static. But then there's things that I'm always learning. I know that's, might be weird for people to hear. Like, you've been doing this for 25, 30 years. What do you mean? But I'm constantly hearing things out of clients, people I talk to, communities I'm a part of. I learn something new every day. And I think that's actually the part that, I'm in love with and I come back to is what's going to be new? What are people doing I haven't thought of? What are the other approaches? Whether I agree with them or not is a different topic, but at least sort of understanding how people get to where they're going and what they're trying and what their results are is kind of fascinating to me. So I think, for me, that's the day that I stop learning, I probably won't really love it anymore, I imagine.
Okay, fun. Okay. And is it all building towards something that you're hoping to kind of do or achieve in the next 5-10 years? Or are you just kind of, let's just see where this train goes good at the moment. Let's keep going.
Yeah, I think, I don't have the big, master plan. I think I have some ideas of where I'd like to be in 3 to 5 years, just like anybody else. But at the end of the day, I always say the market decides, I'm, what I do professionally and also sort of just me being involved in certain communities outside of work. I recognize I don't have any control, over most of those things. So I'm along for the ride, just like everybody else. And it's sort of my job to figure out how do I remain, relevant and learn and add value in this space and never get to a place where I feel like I have it all mapped out. I know everything. Cause I think once you do that, then you're probably toast. So I think of it the other way. I always think that someone out there knows more than I do and is going to take all my business and eat my lunch. And if I don't, keep up with everything and do the right set of things, then I'm probably falling behind and putting myself at risk, So I guess that's good advice for anybody listening too. Like just keep learning, keep going. Don't ever think that you're at the top of something, because the second you do, you're not.
Yeah. And I think especially when we're talking about a digital setting where we're online, where remote is obviously so possible, but the pace of everything is so fast. It's hard to keep up. I used to write code. And I haven't written code now for 4 or 5 years. And if I was to jump back into that, I'd be so far behind what the team are doing. In fact, I was asked by the team to stop writing code because I was getting further and further behind. They're like, "You're better at sales. You focus on sales." I was like, "That's a good bet."
Well, I think from a career perspective, that's actually like really good advice as well for anybody, right? Whether it's community or anything else, is that, find the thing you're good at and just double and triple and quadruple and quintuple and sextuple down on that. Find your niche and just, drive towards that as hard as you can. I think there's some value to, to some degree being, a generalist and having skills across a wide range of things. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think, the most successful people I know have just really figured out what they're good at and what they're not good at. And they've eliminated as much of the latter as possible and, tried to just go do that thing that you're better than anybody else in the world at. And if you do that and you do it well, then I think it's all going to work out in the end.
There's a book called How Google Works. And in fairly early on in the book, they talk about this concept of a smart creative, someone who's an excellent generalist, but has really deep knowledge at certain things. So, I can do a little bit of marketing, I can do a little bit of this, but I have really deep knowledge on a few specifics, which makes me really valuable at those things. And I think being willing to do lots of things, but also having that vertical, especially in CM world, is super helpful, because often community managers or community teams are small. So being able to kind of roll your sleeves up and start planning that event or whatever that campaign is important. But having that deep knowledge on a couple of really particular things is really good, just general career advice.
Yeah.
Nice. So let's pretend you've just signed a new client, Brian. You're really excited to get working with them. What are the 3 questions you're going to ask them to really get to the goal? Because what we often find when we're onboarding a new client is they think the problem is X. And you start asking a few questions and you find actually their problem is this, and then it almost throws them into an existential crisis because they didn't realize they even have an identity problem to start with. And it turns out they have a huge identity problem. So how about yourself?
Well, I think you just nailed it, right? I think figuring out what the actual problem we're trying to solve here is so much of the work. It's not all of the work, but I think identifying that. So, I would typically start with, what are your goals? What are you trying to solve for? What's the problem? What are you trying to achieve? What does success look like? I'll often ask people the question that way, and that sort of reveals certain things. I think once you sort of get down to, okay, we've identified the problem, or at least, we think we have, then I want to ask, how do you measure success, right? Because oftentimes, even though we might agree on what the problem or the problem set is, we might have different perspectives about how we solve it or what does success look like. So I'm always trying to figure out, in a very tactical way, actually, how would you measure it? What kind of numbers or data would you need to know that we're moving the needle on that thing, or that we've solved a thing? And I find that to be a useful exercise really early on for people. Sometimes I think it feels really early to people. Like, why are we talking about metrics and measurement? We haven't even really done the work yet. But I think if you start with, what kind of data and numbers can I even prove that I'm solving this thing, even if we solve it? I mean, is there any path to me knowing if it's working or not? I think is really important. And then the last one, and I think this is a great interview question too. Like, if you're like, it's applicable for what I do, what you do, but also if you're just, doing job interviews, I always like to ask, the interviewer, what's the biggest problem I can solve for you? What's the biggest challenge to overcome here? And simultaneously, what's going to be my biggest challenge? So I often ask people that from a consulting perspective to say, hey, if we work together and we're going to go attack this thing, what do I need to be on the lookout for? And it's amazing what people will tell you, if they're being honest about, well, we have a political challenge inside the org, or someone's difficult, or we don't have the budget, or whatever gets revealed, through that question is often very, very insightful.
I have a similar question I use in line management meetings, which is, what's the smallest thing I could do that would have the biggest impact to your day-to-day life at work? And sometimes they come up with something really trivial, like, my mouse keeps sticking. But sometimes you're like, ooh, that's gold. That would affect everybody if we made that one change. Did you find when you're working with maybe larger, maybe more legacy clients, I say legacy in kind of they've been around longer, joining the dots between what they're doing in community world and, let's say, a goal is around, I don't know, net profit or whatever that is, joining the dots to be more difficult from a technical point of view, in terms of it's really hard for us to even get the correct data to prove X equals Y?
It totally depends.
Okay.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Different companies or organizations have, very different outlooks or muscles that they've built or tools at their disposal, to get access to data, to do something with it, to build, analytics or dashboards or whatever the case is. Sometimes it's actually easier in the bigger companies just because they have bigger budgets and access to more tools, and they have people on staff that are data analysts, data scientists, that you can get some of their time to help solve a problem. So I would say it's pretty unique, to every organization. And that's kind of why up front I start asking about data and measurement and, how would you know if it's working? Because that'll sort of surface through those conversations of, okay, what is our data stack? What kind of skills do we have in the org to do that? How hard can I push, on my end to do that based on what their answers are? So yeah, it's really, I would say, a lot of variance among all the orgs. And so you just try to figure out from there, okay, what's our actual, capability to measure things here?
We always find it interesting when somebody tells us what their measurement of success is, and then we ask them what the last 12 months of that metric is, and they go, oh, we don't measure it. And you're like, okay, well, we're gonna spend X amount of money making these changes, but we can't prove if that was successful or not. Right. So we need to just get some ground, even if it's just 30 days, we just need some data to prove that what we've done has actually moved the needle. Because similar to what you do, if we can prove that we've made incremental changes, which has affected maybe bottom line, then that is so much easier for us to then justify the budget being spent on us. But if we're just, coming up with these new metrics that have no baseline, I might as well just tell you that, the sky is pink. It makes no difference. There's no baseline, right?
Yeah. Everybody who's ever worked with me, and, I've probably put this online a million times as well. I always talk about the most valuable slide I've ever created is just a slide with a table with two columns in it, right? And on the left column, it's your high level business goals. We're trying to reduce churn. We're trying to get more customers. We're trying to keep the ones we have, whatever those 5 like high level things that every company has, even though everybody thinks they're unique, but it's always like the same 4 or 5 high level company goals. Yeah. And then in the right column, it's here's what we're doing in community to, try to help we're not going to solve all those things, right? It's
Mhm.
not a magic bullet or whatever, but how are we contributing to those company level goals? And the exercise of filling in that table, just a big, ugly, 2-column table, that exercise is the most valuable thing we do because it helps
Mm.
us think about what do we do here? Why does it matter? How do we talk about it in relation to what the company cares about or the other terminology we use in the company? So I think oftentimes people think that, when we talk about, we use words like strategy and, we're going to do a workshop and, these words, oftentimes, the delivery mechanism of that is just a big, ugly, 2-column table with a couple of rows. But what that exercise surfaces is what's, the most important thing and impactful. And then to your point, it bridges that gap of, okay, we're doing this stuff over here, but how do I go talk about it,
Mm.
with different groups in the company based on the words and the metrics and the things they care about?
Yeah, that for sure. That's really good. And you mentioned their value, so I'm intrigued. I would imagine for you, a long-term partnership with a client is more beneficial than a short-term partnership. But I also imagine you deliver quite a lot of value in the early months of working with someone, kind of trying to find out what maybe their blockers are, what they're trying to measure, etc. How do you keep delivering value on month 18, month 19, month 30, as much as you were in month 2 and 3? Like, it feels like
Yeah.
what you do for an organization would change along that timeline.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it totally does. And that's usually called out pretty early on that, there's sort of these phases, milestones, mindsets. And so the one that I often talk about is sort of strategic versus operational, right? So in the beginning, it's very much strategic. It's what's our plan? How are we going to measure it? Who do we need involved? Who are the people? It's all that high level strategy stuff, and then selling that to the right stakeholders or
Mm.
business owners or whatever it is. And then at some point, you have to transition from that to, okay, we made a bunch of pretty slides. We said a bunch of things, right? We committed to a bunch of KPIs. Now we have to go do it, right? And I think this is the most valuable thing, actually, is being able to do both,
Mm.
really well. Because I think that a lot of people are really good at strategy, but not sort of operationalizing it. Or there's a lot of people who are really good at oh, just give me a plan and I'll go do it, but I don't want to do the planning because I'm not a strategist, right? So, having just been doing this for so long and working with so many companies and doing it myself at companies, I've sort of developed, throughout that, I guess, chain. So I think you have to know when to sort of say, okay, we did it. We made all the beautiful slides and convinced everybody this is a good idea. Now it's time to go actually do the work, right? And
Mm.
how do you shift from, one to the other and then actually do it, actually execute and deliver the things you said you were going to do in the time frame you said you were going to do it and get the results that you said you were going to get. So yes, there's very different phases and, kind of how you think about it. But that's how I sort of, pitch it to people and how we tend to work together.
Are you able to give a real life, obviously without breaking any NDAs, a real life example of maybe something you put into place that had real world impact, from a positive point of view, for an organization?
Yeah, totally. I think like the one I would talk about is, for a while I worked at a data analytics company, data science company called Ultrix, and we built a lot of things. But I think the one that was like a really great example of this is one day I was having a chat with our CEO, and he was sort of saying, we've learned through talking to customers and doing surveys and asking them, what they find value in, that they like the value proposition of the product at that company is very much how many workflows do you build or how many are running in production. And there's some magical number, to say, hey, once people get past 3 or 5 or 7, that's when they're kind of locked into us, right? That's when they're going to, really get the value and they won't be able to leave, frankly, because, they have these things operationalized and it's really hard to undo that and shift it to another product. And so therefore, strategically as a business, the goal was, how do we get people to build more workflows? And to do that, how do we expose them to more use cases or stories about how other people use this product? Because we need to help them understand what the capabilities are so they can then go build more workflows, right? So that was sort of the high level business strategy part. And we said, okay, well, how can we do that from a community perspective? And we built what we call the use case matrix. I think it's just called the use cases these days. And it's still on the community. You can go, check out the use cases there, where we basically built a program to say to our customers and our partners and our internal users of the product, tell us what you've done with this thing, and what problem were you trying to solve, how did you do it with the product, and what was the outcome. That's always the structure. And these are written by customers for customers, right? So it doesn't necessarily go through any kind of marketing flow or something. They certainly have those success stories on the .com, for example, but we really wanted these to be in your own words and putting the customer first, and having them have an opportunity to tell their story in their own way, right? And a lot of them are just amazing because they told their story. They have screenshots of their workflows. A lot of people uploaded the actual workflow file itself, so you can just go there and download it and start using it right away. So it was this very like community crowdsourced storytelling, but also sharing of, here's how I did it and you can do it too, copy my work essentially. And through that process, we did it, right? We drove higher rates and, numbers of workflows that people were building and that they had access to the knowledge. So good example of like a more content crowdsourced, community-based approach to solving a real business challenge that we had.
Was there an incentive for people to share their stories, or were they just kind of willing to come forward? Like what was the hook?
Yeah, for sure. We definitely gamified it. So there was a couple of things, there, like once a year or twice a year, we did awards at our customer conferences about, the best use cases, the best stories. So a lot of those sort of became entries automatically into that, contest, I guess you would call it. And the people who won, of course, got to come on stage and get a physical award and all that. Sometimes we would, deliver swag and other things. So yes, there was very much I guess the biggest and probably most important one to most people was you get to tell your story with your name attached and have this asset that you can then use to show your boss and say, look at the great work I'm doing. I want that promotion or raise, or I can do more. Or if you want to take it to another company and say, here's a very concrete example of the work that I've done in the past, right? That's easily Googleable, anybody can find. So I think that was, probably the biggest thing for most people, is just kind of having their name up in lights in that way. But then there was all the second order, kind of gamification and awards and other things that went along with it.
I've had this theme kind of running through my head throughout our conversation, and it's something that I've kind of chatted to our team about, and it feels like you've just touched on it there, is a lot of what we do is helping our clients look good to their bosses. And it sounds really vain, but it is. It's like, how do we make our clients look great to who they're reporting to? And if that means we just create a really simple report with that one metric their boss cares about, and we just email it to them every day or every month, whatever it is, and that just helps them with their career, then that's what we should be doing, because ultimately they're the ones who are engaging with us. And it sounds like you just said the same thing there. If John Smith or whoever it is, Sally Doe, can have their name and their company name on a .com website, whatever it is, that makes them and their brand look good, and so on and so on. And so much of what we do with our partners is helping them just look good in front of their bosses.
Yeah, my general ethos, whether it's been as a consultant, as a person working at a company, as a manager, a leader of people, is just to make other people heroes. That's like the simplest form of this. If I can make one of my team members look like a hero internally, great things are going to happen for them and for our team. If I can make a stakeholder at a company where I'm a consultant look like a hero, that's going to be great for them and great for me probably in the long run, and whatever else. So I think that's exactly, you definitely nailed it. And that's, I think, the greatest thing to have is just sort of a guiding North Star of how you operate. And then you get to live vicariously through everybody else's success, right? Their success is sort of yours in some way, even if you don't, fully claim it and, that sort of thing. I think just figuring out, community members, same thing. How do I make them a hero in their organization or the hero of their story for whatever the purpose of the community is? That is often, the shortest route to victory and the most fruitful in the long run.
Every year at Steadfast, we have like a theme. And this year in 2024, what year are we in? My brain has had a real meltdown there. Is Year of the Client. And our head of client, Jacob, he's head of client and creative, did a fairly long talk on how to make the hero, the client, the hero of their own story, whether it was how we communicate with them through email, how it was how we celebrate them on social media, however it was. And it's such an important thing, is knowing how to do that. And it's amazing how many connections you can make through that kind of mentality. And even though folk move on and you may not have a direct relationship with them anymore, they will remember those little interactions you've had where you've made them feel great about themselves. And it's surprising how often that loops back to just be good at some point in the future. It's almost like you're just building up these like great moments, interactions with people that at some point will swing round and benefit you too.
Yeah. What's funny about it is when we have these kinds of conversations and we say, just make the customer the hero, put them at the center, customer centricity, right? Customer focus, all these terms that we use in community and advocacy, in customer experience, all these kinds of fields. It sounds so good and so easy coming out of our mouths. And it's like, why doesn't everybody just do that then? Right. And the answer is because it's hard.
Yeah.
Right. And most companies culturally and individuals at those companies, that's not the ethos there. That's not the mindset. It's more about, how do I do what I need to do to get things done? Or what are our goals as an organization? Or what metrics do I need to deliver on to keep my job, or, whatever. And we sort of get lost in that. And I totally understand why, right? I get why that's the case. But I think you'll find that the companies and the communities and the individuals involved in all of that, if you are able to sort of step outside yourself and, worry a little bit less about your goals and metrics and what the company's drivers are, and more about how do we make customers successful and how do we make them the hero of the story, then all the stuff that we're trying to do on the back end from a business perspective will often turn out. Or if it doesn't turn out, at least I get to look at myself in the mirror every day and say, I tried, right? I tried to make someone else the hero. I tried to make them successful. And even if it didn't work out for me, I can still feel good about what I did. But I think you'll find that in most cases, that is the path, to victory for most organizations. They just have to be willing to do it. And I think that's a hard thing culturally for a lot of people to do.
There's a real feel-good vibe talking to you, Brian. I think it must have been that morning coffee you've had. You've not yet jumped into your inbox. You're on a good streak.
Yeah. The reality hasn't hit me yet this morning. But I do believe in this stuff. These aren't just things that I say, because I think that this stuff is, at the end of the day, right? Like, these are jobs. This is work. This is what we do to make money for a living. If I can help other people be happy and successful and live vicariously through them on my way to, getting the paycheck and like whatever, then I think that's a much better route than, killing and cajoling and, stepping on other people to get where I want to go. So, sometimes, like it's funny because sometimes I get accused of like, oh, you're too business focused, you're too metric focused, you only care about ROI, that sort of thing. And I think what you're hearing from me is those are the outcomes, right? But how you arrive at those things is actually very much a people-centric, customer-centric kind of mindset. It's a different approach, right? But I think at the end of the day, like, I just want to be about people and helping people, and it'll all happen, whatever's going to happen after that is however it's going to go.
But that career motto is similar to just community as a foundation of businesses in general, right? It's not a quick fix. It's not how quickly can you climb or improve your funnel. Community is not the answer to filling your funnel as quick as possible. Community is foundational for the long term, building, things that's going to last, not let's just climb that as quick as possible. And I think it sounds like the ethos of what community does for businesses and what you're trying to do in your career feels like they match, which makes perfect sense, right? It'd be odd if they didn't, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you have to understand, you have to do both, right? You have to
Mm-hmm.
understand, what your business is asking of you, and what are the outcomes they're driving towards, and how do you show them some of that. And I think sometimes what you just said is exactly right about community not being a quick fix, but I think sometimes community professionals harm themselves by going a little hard on that message inside
Mm-hmm.
the organization and saying, well, this is going to take 5 years, and there's going to be no ROI for 4.5 of those years. And that's just the way that it is. And a lot of the business owners are pretty turned off by that, right? And it's like, wow, I can't believe I'm going to get nothing out of this for 5 years. So I think, you have to find a way to say, well, look, here's going to be the short-term impact and some of the signs that we're headed in the right direction, right? We're on the right trajectory, but we won't be fully where we want to be for some time, but at least we'll know it's working.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to figure out how to balance that message and read the room and kind of tell the in-between story of, yeah, it's not a quick fix, but I'm also not going to sit here and say that you'll have zero ROI for 10 years or something. I just don't think that's a reasonable, kind of approach or conversation to have inside of a company.
And it feels like one of the differences I've noticed in chatting to community professionals between those who are starting off in their career and those who have been around a little bit is those that have been around a little bit understand the language and the terminology that's needed in terms of delivering the correct data metrics to who needs to know what. Ultimately, your community is being funded by somebody. It has to deliver results somewhere, and it is coming out of someone's budget. So how do you use data to inform the community strategies you're putting in place?
Yeah, I mean, at a high level, what I try to do is help people see the bigger picture, but also bring clarity. Like, that's my job. At the end of the day, my job is to bring clarity, if nothing else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one way to do that is to kind of, sometimes when you start talking about data and metrics and ROI, that can be pretty intimidating to people, right? Community professionals in particular are not data scientists. They're not data analysts, and they shouldn't be to some degree. I think there's some things they should learn there that would help them along. So a lot of the ways that I talk about it is actually kind of similar to the way marketing would talk about a funnel, right? I often describe acquisition, conversion, onboarding, engagement, and then retention in that specific order. And the reason is that oftentimes people will come and say, we have an engagement problem, right? People aren't engaging in our community. Can you help us? And through this sort of reframing of, well, wait a minute, let's back up and look at how are we acquiring people, or how are we promoting the community, right? How are we getting the word out about this thing? How are we converting them, from passive to active? Did they sign up for an account? Are they a registered member? How did we onboard them? Was there a drip campaign? Was there, hands-on onboarding? Was there cohort onboarding? Is there a resource center? Like, how do we think about that? Or, what are the activities in that flow? All the way through, right? And then, okay, how are we engaging them? How do we keep them? What you often find is that most people don't have an engagement problem. What they have is an acquisition problem, an onboarding problem, a conversion problem, right? And so through that process, if you take those 5 stages and you assign, a specific metric to each one, then you can actually just, like marketing would do, you understand the percentages. Where are we losing people? Hey, we're really good at getting people to visit this community, but we're not good at getting them to sign up and become a member. Okay, cool. That's a problem I can go solve now, right? Now I know where we're dropping off and where we're losing people. Now I know where to focus our efforts. So that's kind of the highest of the high level strategy. There's a lot more obviously that goes into each one of those things. And then what do you do about it once you've discovered the challenges? But just sort of simplifying it in that way and giving people one metric for each of those so that they can understand, where that goes. And then the other one, which is kind of the higher level bit we already talked about in terms of what I just said is more of the operational community metric, but then it's, okay, now how do we tie this to the business objectives in a way that feels reasonable and people can wrap their head around? And ultimately, again, do we have the data to prove that? Because you can say, well, we're going to align community to retention or happiness or whatever those things are. If you don't actually have a path towards measuring that, then we're kind of probably wasting our time doing some of those things because we'll never be able to show that we're actually doing it. So I think it's really important for people to understand that you can go to a meeting and agree to orient your strategy to hit a specific outcome or metric. But if you have no path to measuring that, then I think it's not that you shouldn't do those things or that they're not worthwhile. It's just, it's going to be very difficult inside the business to say, hey, we spent $40,000 doing this campaign or this contest or, whatever it is in community. And they say, okay, well, how does that impact the bottom line or retention? You say, I don't know. Yeah. So I think you have to have some path to that. So I think those are kind of the two frameworks, is the operational and the business metrics, and how you hopefully link it all together in some meaningful way.
Brian, there are so many good things you've said in this podcast today. Thank you so much for joining me and chatting me through just a little bit of inside your brain today. It's been really helpful and really insightful just to hear about how you go around talking to clients and helping them ultimately work out what they need to be doing. So no, I really do appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me. It's great. I love talking about this stuff. So anytime.
Fab. If people aren't already connected with you, kind of where's the best place to reach out, get in touch, or follow you?
Yeah, I think at this point, LinkedIn is probably, I post a lot of content there. A lot of the stuff we're talking about, I'm a big believer in just sharing what I know for free for people. So LinkedIn's a great place for that. Otherwise, I would recommend go to my website. It's just brianoblinger.com. And at the top there, you can find the links to the podcast and the academy and free resources, templates, all this kind of stuff that you can just have and take and steal. So great artists steal, as I like to say. So go find that stuff and rip me off and be better for it.
Great. Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate it. And for everyone else, we will see you next week for another episode of the Digital Community Leaders Podcast. Cheers. This is the Digital Community Leaders Survey 2023. And this is the Digital Community Leaders Survey 2023 second edition. Back in 2023, we released a beautiful printed book. And due to its popularity, we sold out of printed copies. Rather than reprinting, we listened to your feedback and we included 40% more content in this copy. We created the report to be a data-backed handbook for building the foundations of your brand's community. For instance, did you know that 70% of communities we surveyed saw growth over the last 12 months? And we know those businesses are growing too. Other metrics we dive into include community growth, biggest pain points, community purpose, what are other community managers measuring, funding, participation, C-suite involvement, and much, much, much more. In this book, we present the data and expert insights from Richard Gott, Michelle Goodall, Vincent Boone, Keen Bakatari, Rosie Sherry, Matt Sullivan, Laura Roth, Nicole Saunders, Blaise Grimes-Vaught, and Jan Carlisle. We've also included frameworks such as the community archetypes, ecosystem of impact, community participation ladder, and the community first culture nexus. There's so much in here, I can't wait for you to get your hands on this new edition. You can order your printed copy from Amazon today, or download a digital copy for free at digitalcommunityleaders.com.